Hey guys, welcome back to FPS Zen. Sorry it took so long, but let's get into that Ryzen 3000 versus Intel 9th Gen comparison. So for my test system setup, I was using an AMD 3700X with an Asus Crosshair 8 Wi-Fi with the current and only BIOS 0702, G-Skill 3200 CL14 B-Die RAM, and Windows 10 1903 with all updates applied. So let's get right into why I had trouble benchmarking Ryzen 3000. Firstly, memtest was failing with XMP/DOCP profile loaded. This is weird or odd or shouldn't really be happening, as the kit is QVL'd to work with the Crosshair 8. The kit passes memtest without issue on an Intel 9th Gen system, as well as Ryzen 3000 natively supports DDR4 3200. This issue, or the cold boot issue that's still happening with Ryzen 3000 in X570, I need to recommend testing on any new builds or upgrades that you guys do to make sure you aren't just using a system that's having problems. Firstly, you need to load the XMP DOCP in BIOS, save and exit. Secondly, shut down and toggle off power to your system. That could be from the power strip, power supply switch, unplug the whole thing, whatever you want to do. Hit the power button to clear power from the system. Toggle the power back on and make sure you pass BIOS without failing the training. Make sure it posts and goes all the way through to Windows. That detects if you're having the cold boot issue. If you have a cold boot issue, you're going to get a hit F1 to continue type error prompt. Now, hopefully you're not having the cold boot issue, but if you're not, you can continue on. Go ahead and load up a USB thumbstick with memtest connected to the system and via BIOS boot into it, or set it as a BIOS option for default boot and boot it that way. Either way, go ahead and let that run for a few passes. Make sure that it has a good amount of time. Memtest usually takes a couple hours to go through and really test the system thoroughly, and make sure that you don't have any memory type error failures due to the XMP or DOCP profile being loaded. That's how you detect the issue that I personally had that prevented the benchmarking. And again, I must stress that this is how to test for the issues. This is not how to fix the issues. I believe that these memory issues are coming from bad hardware, bad motherboard, bad CPU, bad memory controller in the CPU. So I personally would exchange parts at this point to see if I can get the error to go away. Now, moving on to my next issue I had benchmarking Ryzen 3000, that was DPC latency. A lot of people don't ever test for this. There's probably a number of benchmarks or reviews online showing performance numbers while on Windows 1903, while also having DPC latency issues, which could be affecting their benchmarks. Now, DPC latency was extremely poor when running my system on Windows 1903. This issue affects some AMD and Intel systems and is Windows version specific to 1903. However, if you load 1809 instead, you'll be missing the important scheduler updates for Ryzen. Now, for advanced users, I can tell you how to test it. However, you may not feel comfortable doing things like disabling devices in Windows Device Manager. So, to get into it, after loading Windows and all the latest drivers, install a program called LatencyMon. You can Google it and download it, it's free. Disable your graphics card and network card or cards temporarily in Windows Device Manager. Close all open programs and run LatencyMon for a good 10-15 minutes. Do not move your mouse, change anything, disconnect USB devices, etc. Just leave it alone, let it do its thing. Don't worry about disabling those devices in Windows Device Manager. Your monitor will continue to display even though your video card is disabled. Now, if LatencyMon sees an issue, it'll tell you about it right away or immediately, so you can just stop the test early and re-enable your network and video cards. Hopefully, it will not find any issues. However, if it does, you'll need to consider one of two options. Number one is to reinstall from scratch with Windows 1809 and go without those scheduler updates. Or number two, I have seen a number of posts saying that you can update to a newer version of Windows that's not out yet, an insider build, where Microsoft has fixed the DPC issue. Now again, I must stress, while it was for me, this is not an AMD specific issue. Now, without memory running at correct speed and latency slowed by the operating system bug, performance numbers would be lower than they should be, hence why I will not be including benchmarks in this video. However, we still have lots of other information to cover. The first thing I want to go over is Ryzen 3000's boost frequencies are not comparable to Intel 9th Gen. Intel 9th Gen on an unlocked TAO motherboard can boost forever, unlike Ryzen, as voltage needed for the maximum single-core clock is below maximum voltage safe for all core current draw, 1.4 volts. With enough cooling, single-core boost clocks can be applied to all the cores and held indefinitely. For example, on the 9900K, that's 5 GHz. On the AMD version of the same motherboard, single-core boost cannot be held or applied to all cores as voltage needed for max single-core clock, 1.5 volts, is above the maximum safe voltage for all core current draw, 1.325 volts. Essentially, they're pulling higher frequency boost peaks out of their chips by increasing voltage, mostly for marketing purposes to sell the chips at a higher boost frequency number than they would be able to otherwise. However, this is still safe and stable as they have a boosting system called Precision Boost, which monitors many factors and pulls the boost back before it gets to be unsafe. Since boosts are sometimes extremely short, monitoring software may not capture the frequency or voltages that they get up to, etc. Performance benefit may not be there, and temps may be higher than they would be otherwise. This means that if Intel was to implement something like Precision Boost with their 9900K, they would have a single core boost frequency of something like 5.5 GHz on the label or the box, however not be noticeably faster when you're actually using it. And I'm going to pull up a website here called siliconlottery.com where they actually bin chips after AMD has already bin them at the factory. And what we can deduce from this is that the 3700X comes in a range of 4.05 GHz to 4.15 GHz on an all-core load. This is a fixed frequency. This is a frequency that it can handle on a 24/7 workload, maximum workloads like Prime 95. On the 3800X, that comes from 4.2 to 4.3, and the 3900X from 4 to 4.2. And what these really example is what the all-core frequency is going to be like on these processors, or more of a real-world example of what you're going to see as far as frequency performance from these processors. Not these so-called boost clocks that are on the label, as those labeled boost clocks may only be held for nanoseconds. Now, I do not consider this a win for Intel or AMD, just informational. Now, you may be wondering why Intel still has the lead in gaming. Hardware Unboxed did a test where they tested the IDA64 latency, and that tests how fast the CPU can access data from the actual RAM sticks. And you'll see that the 9900K at the top here in the dark blue line is able to access it in 50 nanoseconds, whereas Ryzen 3000 on the second and third lines in this graph take 75 approximately nanoseconds to access that data in the RAM chips. This isn't the only reason, however it is one of the main reasons. And in this graph, they're using the SAI software multi-thread latency test, where it measures in nanoseconds how fast cores can talk to each other. The 9900K, you'll see at the top here, is able to very consistently talk between cores, whereas Ryzen 3000, when it's talking within a CCX, is actually a lot faster at 30 nanoseconds. However, when it has to go to a core that's not on the same CCX and has to go through the Infinity Fabric, it takes a lot longer. This inconsistency is also why Intel's leading in gaming still. And that brings me to number 3. Undervolting on Ryzen does not work as expected. On Intel, undervolting will lower heat output as long as the chip gets enough juice to remain stable. On Ryzen 3000, undervolting lowers performance of the chip to try and remain stable and is not recommended. 4. AMD IPC has improved approximately 15% since last series. L1 cache bandwidth is now on par with Intel, and L2 and L3 cache bandwidth is now greatly exceeding Intel. This is why AMD has similar performance as Intel now, even though their clock speeds are lower. Now, as far as those benchmarks I was going to personally run with a 9700K overclocked versus a 3700X overclocked, actually I found that video where somebody else has ran it, Jarrod'sTech, and I'll link that in the description, and I recommend you take a look at that to see the numbers. Now, I've used these numbers and other information that I've come to myself as well as from others to come to my conclusions for today. Conclusions on the CPU. So, setting aside the DPC issues with Windows 1903, the AMD cold boot and XMP issues that I had, probably with one-off bad hardware, boosting differences between the two platforms, and undervolting not working as expected, with Ryzen 3000 and X570 now on the market, what is best now depends on what you use your PC for. Now, if you use it for mostly gaming, you want that historical stability for older programs that haven't been updated in a long time, as well as raw compatibility that's been tested across years and years of Intel leading, as well as maybe a little bit of Adobe Premiere. Intel 9th Gen is going to be the way to go. Now, if you use your PC mostly for professional work like AVX, AVX2 workloads, or if your applications can leverage more than 8 cores that Intel can provide, or if you yourself can leverage the insanely fast speeds of PCI Express 4 NVMe storage SSDs, then of course Ryzen 3000 is going to be the way to go. Now keep in mind, these are slight differences, so if you already have an Intel 9th Gen system, it's not going to be worth it to upgrade to Ryzen 3000. Same if you're already on Ryzen 3000, it's not going to make much sense to move to Intel 9th Gen. So just keep in mind, just because your workload changes over time, these two are so similar that you're going to get a similar experience out of both. Now, before I end the video, I want to cover some motherboard information for you guys. Number one is many motherboards before X570 did not get a BIOS chip large enough for Ryzen 3000's BIOS changes. This means motherboard manufacturers may have to remove features to add support for Ryzen 3000. This is something to research before buying or using an older X570 motherboard with Ryzen 3000. Also, a quick side note, even if you don't have Ryzen 3000, you should be on the lookout for these BIOS updates, as it actually might revert your performance or remove features that you actually want. Number two is many motherboards before X570 did not get VRMs large enough for 3900X and 3950X, especially if you're planning to overclock them. This means the motherboard VRM may limit your full potential of your CPU with the 3900X or 3950X. And I'll put up a snapshot here, and you'll see that the far left two lanes are your 3950 and 3900X, and you'll see that it is very hard to run those CPUs on X470, let alone some of the other chipsets such as X370 or B350. While X570 does add support for PCI Express version 4, PCI Express version 4 brought a chipset fan with it, as small chipset fans were a design choice by almost all of the motherboard manufacturers of X570 due to the extra heat the PCI Express version 4 brought with it. Small fans do make noise, and since they're a moving part, have a higher chance of failure. You may want to do some research on the motherboard before purchase to make sure that the chipset fan is within your noise tolerance and doesn't have a high rate of failure. And number four is that many X570 motherboards are taking around 30 seconds to just post. That means just get to where the BIOS screen shows up on your monitor, greatly lengthening the time of boot. As well as 5, as many motherboard brands have duplicate unlinked options in the BIOS, where you'll set one option one place, you'll look and find that same option somewhere else in the BIOS, and it's not set at all, making things very confusing. You don't know if things are running or not, and requiring testing in some cases. Hopefully AMD and the motherboard manufacturers will resolve 4 and 5 with BIOS updates soon. Well guys, as you saw, this launch was crazy, and this video ended up being far from what I had planned. It's still the most involved video I've done yet, including the new studio for you guys. I'm entirely self-funded, and days of work went into getting this video together. If you found this video at all helpful, please subscribe, ring the bell, give me a thumbs up, thumbs down. If you have any questions for me, please leave it in the comments and I'll get back to you as soon as I can. And feel free to leave me any suggestions or content requests there as well, or let me know if I missed anything in this video. Until the next one.